I'm Vera Papasova. I'm the wellness editor at Teen Vogue. And today we're going to be talking about overcoming barriers in girls' education and ensuring access to primary and secondary education, which means tackling these critical barriers, which includes child marriage and early pregnancy. Basically, a lot of issues that too often end girls' education all over the world. In this session, we're going to be discussing issues ranging from discriminatory laws, norms and practices that hold girls back, poverty, resilience and confidence, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. Please join me in welcoming our amazing panel. Here with me, we have Yasmin Hassan. She is the Global Executive Director of Equality Now. We have Joyce Adalwa, the Head of Girls Education, Empowerment and Adolescent Programming at CARE. We have Simon, who you've seen quite a few times today. Simon is the co-founder and managing director of campaigns here at Global Citizen. And then we have Carolyn Miles, who is the CEO of Save the Children. Please give them a round of applause before we begin. So I'm going to start with a question for Yasmin. Yasmin, can you give me some specific examples of how violence against young women and girls is a barrier to fulfilling their full potential through their education?
Yes, I can, and thank you for asking that, because people don't usually talk about violence in the context of education, and this is what we are seeing globally around the world. I'll give you an example. We just started last month a program, an initiative where we wanted to start 25 conversations in 25 schools across Africa. And we were hoping to give girls rights education and talk about, what you can do, what are your rights, what are the international legal system. We started getting questions from these young girls in Kenya, primarily Tanzania, Sierra Leone. And the questions range for one of the questions which really struck me is, what do you do when your biological father is speaking words of love to you when your mother's not around with the purpose of having sex with you, and he pays your school fees? Another question was, what do I do when I was raped walking to school as a child and I can't get that stress out? Third one was, what do you do when your best friend's family believes in female genital mutilation? She resisted, but she's been forced into it. And now she's completely isolated and won't talk to anybody. And it goes on and on and on. And if you look at global statistics, they bear this out. 1 out of every 10 girls is likely to be sexually assaulted in her lifetime. Every single minute, 28 girls are forced into child marriage. Every year, 3 million girls undergo female genital mutilation. Yesterday, a study was launched which said 30 million women are trafficked around the world, and 98 to 99% of victims of sex trafficking are women and girls. This is the world we live in, and this impacts the education of girls, and our education systems overwhelmingly do not deal with it. I'll tell you one story. We had a case in Zambia recently where a young girl, she was 15, was raped by her teacher. When her aunt found out about this case, that what happened, she took it to the headmaster of the school, and when the headmaster was told, he said, "Oh no, not again." Right? Not again, that was his response. And he called the teacher in, and the teacher claimed, "Oh no, she was my girlfriend." And he was allowed to get away with it until we helped this girl bring a legal suit, and we took it all the way to the High Court in Lusaka and won, and the government was held responsible. But overwhelmingly, we found not only are schools not safe spaces for girls, we have predators in school, including here in the United States. You've seen all these cases with private schools where there are investigations on rape of girls or sexual abuse of girls by their teachers. This is supposed to be a safe space, a nurturing space, and it's not. So these issues persist. Violence and discrimination against girls is endemic, and until we get to the root of the problem, girls will not realize their full potential just through the educational system. And sometimes there are government policies which prevent girls who have been violated from going to schools. I'll tell you a recent case we have in Sierra Leone where there's a pandemic of sexual violence. It's so normalized in society. And the president passed a decree saying pregnant girls would no longer be allowed to go to school. So we are bringing that case against the government of Sierra Leone to court, a class action on behalf of girls, because first of all, they were abused. And there's a law of there's statutory rape. They're pregnant because of statutory rape, and yet they are being denied access to an education. So there's a lot that we all have to do together, but I think we have to call out that violence against girls exists in society and the educational system must deal with it.
Thank you. Well, that brings me to Carolyn. Carolyn, who's the CEO of Save the Children, can you explain how economic status factors into teen pregnancy and child marriage, and in turn, how that affects the girls' education?
Sure. Well, thank you, and it's great to be here. I think this is a fantastic panel. Education is the great equalizer, I would say, and it's an equalizer both between the rich and the poor, and it's an equalizer between gender as well. So when you look at those things together, when you look at the poorest girls, those are the girls that really are missing out. So we look at the big numbers and we see the 65 million number, but if you look underneath that and you look at places like sub-Saharan Africa, you'll find that out-of-school girls, girls that are out of school, 80% of them will not ever go back to school. And with boys that are out of school, about 40% of them won't go back. So it's double, right, for girls than it is for boys. And you find that across many, many regions in the world. And when it comes to child marriage, oftentimes it's an economically driven decision. So again, it's the poorest families that will feel that they just don't have a lot of choices for their girls. And oftentimes, I've met many, many girls in many, many countries who have been married at the age of 13 or 14. And when you sit and you talk with them, and Save the Children does a lot of work actually with parents and families to try to prevent this from happening. Because when you sit with families and you say to them, why would you want your girls to be married? Why did you want your daughter to be married when she was 13? They'll say, the father will say and the mother will say, we felt it was the best thing for her. It was the best thing for her. We're very poor. We can't support her. It's the best thing if she goes and she lives with another family and they take care of her. And it really is an issue of poverty. But of course, from an education standpoint, it completely ends education for girls. I mean, the number of girls that are married that stay in school is infinitesimal in the world that we work in. Almost 100% of those girls will drop out of school. So if that's the age of 13, then that is the end of education for that girl. And again, this really affects girls so much that are in the poorest families, the poorest households. I mean, one of the places that you can see this really dramatically is Syria. So if you look at, Syria was a middle-income country. Marriage of 12 and 13-year-olds was really not a common practice. But if you go and you sit and talk with families in the Zatari camp or in the host communities in Jordan or Lebanon, where I've been many, many times in the last 6 years, they will say, again, it was for the girl's best interest that we decided she should be married at 13, 14. When you sit and talk with the girls, I was in Jordan in May, and sitting and talking to a 14-year-old, and she was telling me, I had to beg my parents. I begged them not to make me get married to this man who was 38. And I just had to beg them not to do it. And she said, and Save the Children is, again, doing this work with girls and with parents and with communities to say there are choices. You have to value the education of a girl, and this is not valuing the education of a girl, and you have to value the girl, first of all, right? And give her that opportunity and that chance. So child marriage is a really difficult issue. It's not really so much about laws, because you can look at lots of most every country has a law that says girls shouldn't be married before the age of 16 for most, 18 for many. But if you go to a country like Bangladesh, that law is on the books, yet there are millions of girls that are married in Bangladesh under the age of 18. So it's not about laws, it's about changing the way people value girls. That's it.
And just a quick follow-up, what does their life look like once they are married? What happens to them after that?
Well, a lot of it comes down to what the family that they've married into is like. And in many cultures, I'll give you an example in Nepal, the mother-in-law is the one who makes all the decisions. She decides whether the girl will, have the baby at home or go to a medical clinic. She decides, has a big influence on how many children that girl will have, that young woman will have, what the labor that girl will have to provide to the household. So a lot of it comes down to actually, what is that household like, and what is that mother-in-law like? That's the person who rules that girl's life. So again, one of the things that we do is in communities, we actually form these groups of mother-in-laws, and we get them to really focus on the value of the girls that have married into their family and on the grandchildren that they will have, and how much better the lives of, if you can't get the mother-in-law to care so much about the girl that marries into their family, sadly, you can sometimes get them to care about the grandchildren. And so sometimes we'll go at it that way. It just depends. In some communities, you find these fantastic mother-in-laws that'll be like, I'm going to change things. And once you make them the change agent and you say, yeah, you can actually do that. You can change things in this whole community, then you can get change to happen.
Wow. Well, Joyce, that brings me to you. So we're talking about solutions. What I'm hearing and what I've learned, too, from covering this at work is that policies and laws, those aren't really going to be the end-all, be-all solution. So once we have those policies, let's say we have them, can you tell me about what gender-specific interventions are and why we need them once we have those policies?
Thank you. Thank you for having us. This, again, is a great panel and a great opportunity to be here to share. So, Vera, that's a very good question. In terms of, we normally focus so much on policies being passed as though it is the one thing that needs to happen so that girls can have access to education or healthcare or, live in safety. But we all know, even here in the United States, we do at times have very good policies, but they are not enforced in the way that they should be. And also, in a lot of instances, policies are formulated with very good intent. However, when it comes to each individual based on their social position, then it may or may not work for them. And that is where equity comes in, because a lot of policies in terms of gender have a perspective of equality, which is great. But we all know that because we are, for example, we are of different heights, if we stand on the table, we will, the same leveled table, we will all be at different heights. But we need to have measures that lift those who are of shorter stature to see over the fence, as well as those who are of taller stature that can see comfortably over the fence. And that is what equity is about. So it's really moving beyond looking at equality to what does it take for this girl in this context to be empowered. And that is what CARES programs focus on. This person as an individual, and what are the relationships that surround them that define what they can or cannot do, or what they can be. Because a lot of the decisions that are made about girls are made in their absence. And even when they can speak, they do not have that voice, and they are not allowed to. And when it comes to education, it's very important for us to think about the relevance of education. When you're talking about the 60 million plus girls who are out of school, why are they out of school? Some of it is cultural, some of it is related to norms, but also some of it is a lack of opportunity because of poverty. And so we have to think about education addressing these issues, and the girl and the boy being able to see education as a value. We had a study in Zimbabwe, for instance, where kids are dropping out because they do not see the linkage between education and their livelihood, security. So livelihood security is something that we need to consider when we think about the relevance of education. And livelihood security doesn't end at economic empowerment. We have to think about health and reproductive health. We've all seen the statistics around, if a girl, an educated girl has 2 fewer children, and for every year she's in school, she will earn 10 times more. But think about this. If sub-Saharan Africa invested in secondary level education for their girls, their agricultural production would increase by 25%. a lot of developing countries, there are statistics that show that they lose up to $1 billion a year for failing to educate their girl population to the same levels as boys. And also, when you think there's a study that came out, and this really resonated with me, is that in sub-Saharan Africa, 1.8 million children died because their mothers were not educated. Now, education not only saves lives, but it's also a protective factor when you think about protection from being taken advantage of. We know more educated societies are able to demand for their rights from the powers that be, as opposed to those who do not have an education. So it's a protective factor, it is an enabling factor. But most importantly, what needs to come with that is opportunity. The ability to make a choice, and the ability, and the potential, I don't want to use the same word, but being presented with an opportunity to do something different with your life, so that it's not somebody else who's setting the table or the template, but you do have a point to, you can aspire to be something greater, and that opportunity actually exists for you. And that is what education is. That is why education is empowering, but we have to make it empowering intentionally.
And I want to ask Simon something, but really quick, Yasmin, was it you who were telling me backstage that when girls are educated, they contribute even more to the workforce than boys? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I was telling you that we think that education is a way of unlocking potential, but it's not in the Middle East region, for example, girls have outstripped boys at every level of education, from primary, secondary, all the way to graduate, right? Yet that has not translated into economic empowerment or political empowerment. You know, the participation is not there. And to me, and this is why we come from Millennium Development Goal, which just focused on education for women. We were screaming and shouting at that time, no, there's a lot more that goes into girls' empowerment than simply education, particularly when you're not even going to look at the curricula of the education and opportunities these girls will have outside of it, to the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have integrated all that happens to a woman and girls and all the things we are trying to change into those goals. So I'm hoping that this time we've gotten it right, and we will not only focus on education is extremely important, but you have to do a whole leveling the field, leveling the law, doing all this stuff, and making social change, changing social norms. And I know that's something we all talked about, and everybody's scared of it, but it can be done. You need political will, you know.
So it's a lot of work, it sounds like. Which is my question for you, Simon. You know, all these people here, you showed up, you're here for this conversation. A lot of these girls, a lot of these issues feel really far away. So what can you do when you leave this auditorium, what can you do today or this year to be able to be part of the solution?
So I think all of you have started with what is a vital first step, and I'd encourage you all to keep doing it, which is listen. So much of this challenge and the barriers that girls face is no one's listening to them. And actually, it's so important that we, outside, with opportunity, with privilege, give space to them and really hear the sorts of concerns and challenges that the panel have just talked about here. And I'd like you to take the listening that you do and then think, who can I share this with? Who can I amplify it with? Whether that's because you're reading Teen Vogue and there's a story you're inspired to share, whether it's because you've downloaded the Global Citizen app, please do. What I hope you can do is start trying to change the way that we all think about these issues, because so much of this is based on culture and assumptions. It's based on us thinking that, oh, look, it'll sort itself out eventually. It'll sort itself out when we get in behind the people like the folks on this panel doing the hard work. So learn, listen, share, and then what I'd urge you to do is use your voice. Our voices are incredibly powerful. We heard about the lack of investment into schools in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. In the next 6 months, the Global Partnership for Education is trying to raise $3 billion from the world's donor countries like America and Britain and Canada and Australia. That will be matched 4-to-1 by poor countries themselves. The leverage that we can have to try and unlock and champion the work that people are doing on the ground starts by using our voice to pressure our governments to do the right thing, and by directly supporting the work of groups like Save the Children and like CARE, who are empowering people on the ground themselves. So give what you can, use your voice where you can, but above all, what I'd ask is please listen, share, and talk to other people about how this is actually a surmountable problem.
Thank you so much. Round of applause, everybody.